Hello. Uh, I'm Dr. Terry James Gingras, and this is Dr. G's ADHD Chat, a show trying to make the world safe for ADHDers. I am a clinical neuropsychologist and psychologist, and I'm a little bit in private practice. I started backing out about a year ago, but I still have some patients I see. I also do coaching with ADHD, primarily executives, and we'll talk more about that at the tail end of this thing. But I'm also the parent of at least one and probably two uh, young people, or at least younger than me, who have ADHD and have had to fight the good fight uh, to make it through the system that sort of stands in their way. I'm, of course, referring to our education system. Okay, the last week I talked about a little bit about strengths of ADHD, because I think one of the problems you get, especially when you've had a couple of ADHD kids in the house and had to go through the terrible twos and the not so much better early years, and good lord, then there's adolescence, which um, you'll probably survive, but you won't be without scars. Let's just put it that way. That can be a really tough time, especially if, like most of us back then, don't really know a whole lot about ADHD. I mean, that's partly why I started doing this program, because when I was a young father of young children, first of all, there was no such thing as ADHD. I mean, this is quite a while ago, but there was no such thing as ADHD. It was called hyperreactive syndrome of childhood, which is, as if you wanted to rate the accuracy of a diagnosis, that would get a failing mark, because the premise would be, looking at that, you'd say, well, I guess that means they grow out of it when they get to be adults. No, they don't. They're still got it. And hopefully by now they've learned how to handle it. And the other thing is, it assumes uh, that it's just hyperactivity. It's just running around, jumping off chairs and getting bloody all the time. No, it's not that. Matter of fact, that's probably not the most significant difficulty with ADHD, but of course, it certainly is a major part of it. Probably the major thing would be the whole cognitive stuff, the attention, the working memory, the executive functioning. Those are probably the major things that make life problematic for ADHDers as they get older. Okay, now, these same characteristics that cause so much trouble in, say, the school system are not a problem in a lot of other environments. Most of the things, the high energy level, resilience, those sorts of things that seem to be associated with ADHD are great if you're on the football field or playing lacrosse or soccer or what, the ADHD characteristics are really good. ADHDers are frequently entrepreneurs. The need to make quick decisions and observe and figure out what's happening, what the patterns are in business are, I mean, they're just really designed for that. Okay, so, and every week I say when I'm signing off that we need ADHDers because we need people who think outside the box. Because people who are really comfortable in a box don't change much. They just don't. I'm uncomfortable. Let's keep going. Let's keep doing the same thing. ADHDers get extremely uncomfortable with that. Plus, they have a kind of a unique viewpoint to the world. So they go out there and they see patterns. They see things differently than a neurotypical brain will. So they are creative in the sense that they think outside the box. They're usually good problem solvers, and they tend to spot patterns and trends and things going on a little more quickly than a neurotypical brain will. This is both good and bad. It means that, if they're in a situation where they're listened to, either because they're in charge, they own the place, or they have an unusually flexible and creative leadership that wants to hear their new ideas and so on. If they are in a rigidly structured organization, they frequently will have problems with that. But in general, problem solving, creative thinking, they're great at. Other thing is that doesn't get much publicity, if you will, is that ADHDers tend to be very compassionate. Maybe it's because they frequently go through a lot of stuff themselves, but they tend to accept differences and have a strong sense of right and wrong. I see that in my own. The only times he's really gotten into trouble is when he was defending somebody else who was a little weaker, like in the schoolyard and that sort of thing. So that really is a component of it, of ADHD. ADHDers also are dynamite observers. They look at things and they see the patterns of things that are happening, and they're frequently able to predict the changes that are going to happen, just because they can spot the trends, what way things are going. They also, because they are good, if not great observers, they frequently see the humor in many of the human predicaments that we keep getting ourselves into. It's part of being a good observer. If you're familiar, there's a Canadian comedian named he goes by Red Green. That's obviously not his real name, but anyway, that's what he goes by. And, his humor is all observational sketch comedy. And if you analyzed all the people who are professional comedians, if you did a full ADHD evaluation, I'm sure that way more than 2/3 are diagnosable as having ADHD. The other things that that are positive about ADHD are their energy level. I mean, if you've ever had an ADHD in elementary school, you know what I'm talking about. They are, as long as they can run around and raise cane and nobody says anything, they are on top of the world. The minute you try to get them to sit quietly, do what they're told, they are in purgatory. This is not what they like to do. They like the feeling when they start running. And of course, I've done a couple of programs about neurotransmitters. And exercise stimulates the growth of dopamine, the production of dopamine, not the growth. And that's one of the key components in feeling satisfied with a situation or pleasure in a certain situation. And exercise is a great way to get it. And that may be what they're doing, without being aware of it, why they're doing it. Being so energetic or being running around the house, yelling and screaming and doing all those things that bother adults. Okay, and then, of course, we all have to talk about hyperfocus if we're going to talk about ADHD, because that's probably the characteristic that's gotten the most publicity. And basically, it's the idea that an ADHDer can stay focused on something for hours and hours, work all night and that sort of thing. But, and there is a big but here, it has to be something that they consider pleasurable. If they don't think it's fun, they're going to put it off and put it off and put it off until, until the environment forces them to be a little, to make an effort at doing whatever the task is. But if they really like what they're doing, they can work for hours. My son, the jewelry designer, where that came from, I have no idea. But he can go up there and he's carving on something, and he can just go for hours and hours. That wasn't so much him when he was younger. But I mean, I'll take it. Fine. And he has an uncle that I am sure is ADHD, although he's never been formally diagnosed. And he's the same way. If I set him loose in my garage with all the garbage and junk and wood scraps and whatever is out there, I might not see him for a week or two. He'd just be out there having a good time. But he hates he hates reading, he hates, and so that's part of why we think an interesting characteristic of ADHDers is that they tend to think quickly and make plans quickly and act quickly in chaotic situations. If you're in an emergency, follow the ADHD guy. If you're in combat, definitely, well, maybe 10 yards or so behind him. But they tend to be good people in emergency situations. They do things, even in business. That's one of the reasons they make such good entrepreneurs, is because they see patterns, and then they see that when things are not going well, they make decisions fast and quickly. When they don't have any doubts, they're gone. That's the way we're going to do it. Of course, if they're wrong, well, but they do it quickly. They don't do like many of us do and just sit there and stew about it, going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth until the situation is not salvageable. But they are indeed an interesting group of folks, and in the right situations, they can be incredibly successful. I mean, I know I've mentioned that my wife and I went through the the internet, and God, I wish we'd had AI back then, and grabbed a list of well-known folks with ADHD, and of course there are all kinds of those down there naturally, but we did our own list, and it is amazing how many athletes, entertainers, entrepreneurs have ADHD. We've got Steve Jobs, for instance, entrepreneur king. We've got a bunch of athletes, Mark Spitz and what the heck is his name, Phillips, and a bunch of other people that play team sports, although they're slightly better at the ones that are independent, and musicians. I mean, it's just like I said, those are the kind of situations where they just can follow their own lead, and they can take control and make decisions quickly, and that makes them successful. So the situation is, okay, you don't want to necessarily put these kids Well, you definitely don't want to put these kids in real iron. Well, like a lot of businesses, there's a strict code, but it's not real consistently enforced. And they have a horrible time in those kinds of situations. They don't exactly, well, they just don't do well at that. Okay. If they are in a highly structured environment where there's frequent supervision, close to supervision, like the military, as a matter of fact, a lot of, I'm retired Air Force. We had a lot of ADHD people who did really well because, they were bright, they were energetic. If they were supervised well, they got a lot of work done. Plus, most of them who really did well were in jobs that were kind of dramatic and exciting and glamorous and that sort of thing. And getting an F-16 so it could fly, that appealed to a lot of these guys. So they don't do well, like I said, in situations that are just wishy-washy, and they don't do well in situations that don't value critical thinking and don't value creative thinking. And there are a lot of businesses like that, and probably the worst combination is when you've got a new employee with ADHD and he quickly figures out that he's smarter than all of his bosses. He's going to have troubles. Okay, he's going to have troubles. You need to have had some experience with holding your tongue and some experience with structure, And if you're in a totally unstructured environment and you have less than Class A supervision, probably going to fail. Probably not going to do well. Going to have troubles with it. Going to get frustrated, upset. Going to want to quit. It'll be a catastrophe. Of course, one of the things that should happen with all ADHD kids is they should be evaluated. They should be in treatment early so they know and have learned how to compensate. It's ADHD is a characteristic of a lot of people. We're not really sure how many or what percentage of different populations are ADHD. It's just that the diagnosis rate keeps going up, and people think, oh, well, it's just overdiagnosis. Probably not. The deal with ADHD diagnosis is that it's not like there's a blood test. Okay, it's and I evaluated ADHD for decades and decades, and it wasn't always clear. And then so anyway, but what you want is that they be diagnosed early and learn how to compensate for their different characteristics. And that isn't always medication, but frequently it is. And sometimes, they get through school, they go off medication, and they figure out a way to make everything work for themselves. Fine, not a problem. Medication is not the be all and the end all. It is a simplifier and a shortcut. And a lot of people made it to places they wouldn't have made if they didn't have medication. But that's the way it goes sometimes. Learning to compensate is a huge deal. Learning how do I get myself to do stuff I'm not really interested in? Okay, you've got to figure out ways for that. How do I make up for poor working memory? Well, you need to write stuff down. You need to write it down all the time. Not think, oh, I'm going to remember this, because you're not. You'll forget it. And depending on the situation, you may get into trouble for having forgotten it. Even though it was an honest mistake, you know, in most businesses, they can only tolerate so many honest mistakes before something's got to give. So anyway, so compensation, teaching, you know, how do I control myself? How do I slow myself down? And surprisingly, and I was somewhat surprised at this the first time I did it, but ADHD kids can learn to meditate or you do some kinds of relaxation training. Okay, they can learn to sit quietly and focus inwardly, intensively, and so on. So don't say, "Oh, he's too hyper to ever be able to do this." No, he can do it, but odds are he's going to need somebody who's pretty experienced to teach him, because everybody is familiar, I'm sure, with all the. I mean, we've got. Back in my day, we had CDs. Now we've got internet programs and apps that teach different kinds of meditation. Meditation, for some reason, is the buzzword now. Before, we used to call it relaxation training because people used to get facial tics when you talked about meditation. Anyway, so you need to understand that everybody represents the world a little differently, okay? Some of us are real auditory. Some of us are real visual. Some of us are real tactile, kinesthetic. And we all represent the world slightly differently in slightly different proportions. And if whoever is doing the exercise, the meditation, if you will, doesn't know you from Adam, they're doing it to a generic group. And sometimes that doesn't work out very well. There's always, some people have certain kinds of trauma. That's why you go to somebody who knows what they're doing, because they'll talk to them about trauma and that sort of thing. And then they will let them, or they will design a program for them that will not be traumatizing. Okay, you don't want to take a drowning victim on a boat trip. You don't want to take somebody who has a fear of heights into the mountains. You don't want to take a claustrophobic into a small room. There's just lots of things that need to be dealt with. And, the typical ADHDer will want a more active kind of program. So, come to think of it, I think I better do a program on that and in the future. So, this is me for today. I'm Dr. Terry James Gingras. My website is terrygingrasphd.com. I have a sign up for my coaching program for ADHD folks in business. Mostly, I do kids and I do families sometimes as well. But the periodically I'll do different programs. Right now I'm juggling. Maybe you could help me out here. I've been going back and forth between whether to do a course, say 6 sessions about ADHD and how to parent that way, and I call it strategic parenting. And then I have also been toying with a membership group, something where you just pay kind of a little nibbly fee once a month, and we meet within a group, there'd be some kind of a paid payback or playback or something every week, but usually, one major presentation a month and 3 or 4 smaller presentations outside the major presentation. And you get a chance to form a community where we can share problems with each other and that sort of stuff. So I'm going back and forth between those two, and I was wondering if somebody out there, some of you, might be willing to give me your opinion on which you would rather see, and let me know. Just somewhere back here, you can make comments, and I will look forward to having that. And also, if you have any ideas for new programs or have questions you'd like me to answer, any of that sort of thing, let me know. Okay, so we will catch you later. And remember, we need ADHD people around. We need them because they think outside the box, as I just have talked about. And they're novel problem solvers, and they solve problems that neurotypicals frequently don't even recognize, much less know how to solve. So, that being said, we will catch you next week.